Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 20th of April 2023. Sorry I'm a bit late today. I had to go to the Turkish barber to get every single hair on my head attended to and in many cases eliminated. I'm giving an author talk at my son's secondary school on Monday. And so, wet shave, cutthroat barber blade all across my face. It's on fire now, but in a good way. I don't normally have wet shaves. And hot towel on the face. Turkish barbers are amazing. Anyway, you've not come to hear about that, and you've not come to hear about this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I've got a proof copy. There's another reason I'm a bit delayed today. Proof copies turned up of my new book, co-authored with Dr. Aaron Adair, Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide. It's a beautiful looking book. Dead excited about that. Due out on May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. Do you get it? So that's a philosophical look at the cosmos and our place in it. Really excited about that. But anyway, that's why I'm a little bit delayed today. Let's get, before we get to looking at individual places along the front line, there's quite a lot to talk about. Reporting from Ukraine, which is a pro-Ukrainian YouTuber, talked a lot about last night in their video how the counteroffensive has started, right? I'm dubious as to whether it started. I think you've got preparatory activities probably going on. You've got little movements here, testing things out, and he does talk about how it looks like the main thrust could be in the first weeks of May. And so this is precisely that sort of preparatory moves. But there's been an intensification, according to him, of activity along the Zaporizhia front line and going into Donetsk, Vuhledar, as well as around Orokhiv, to the south of Orokhiv, and other places right along this front line. When you look at the other mappers, there's no reflection in the mappers that I can see. You go to Deep State Map. What Deep State Map do is when there's an attack, they have red arrows to signify, there's pressure there, there's actual fighting going on, which is probably in line with the general staff's releases that you can see on the live UA map. But there has been some changes in the mapping. So if you look around Drozhnyanka over the last couple of days or the last 24 hours, there's some gains for the Russians there, but there's no red arrow. So I have a feeling that might just be a rejigging of the map. The same is for the map up in the very north by Kupiansk here, where we've got Pershey-Travnevi and Vilshana, a couple of places here where again you can see that there's a bit of movement. It seems the Russians have taken territory. Well, that could just be rejigging. There's no arrows there. So anyway, that's kind of Deep State Map, what's going on with them. But let's go to see whether the claims of reporting from Ukraine have any kind of basis to them. The ISW in their preamble says Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar reported on April the 19th, it's yesterday, that Ukrainian forces are already conducting some counteroffensive actions. So, okay, we could start having things moving. And it could be a case of a bit like, well, no, the deep battle tactics and doctrine of the Russians. I think that's what we saw during their offensive phase, was attack everywhere, find a weakness, and then pile in and exploit that weakness. Except they didn't really succeed. Their weakness was Bakhmut. They piled into Bakhmut and they still haven't taken it. So I don't think their deep battle doctrine particularly worked, and actually they have kind of spread out their forces and perhaps attributed them too much. There are hot points like Avdivka, Marinka, Vuhledar, again, Kreminna, and of course Bakhmut. Anyway, the ISW continues. Maliar stated that Ukrainian forces will never preemptively announce when the counteroffensive starts. She said, announcing that it's started, and reiterated that Ukrainian forces aim to liberate all Ukrainian territory. Maliar also reported that Russian forces are concentrating on offensives in Liman, Bakhmut, Avdivka, and Marinka directions, and that Russian forces have concentrated weapons, equipment, and professional units, including Wagner Group forces, Spetsnaz, so that's your special operations forces, SOF, and airborne forces, VDV, as your paratroopers, around Bakhmut. Maliar noted that Ukrainian counteroffensive actions will be both offensive and defensive in nature, given the complex nature of the battlefield. Interesting, not quite sure how to interpret that, but nonetheless, claims are that stuff has started, right? And potentially that pertains to the Zaporizhia and southern Donetsk frontline areas. There's been talk about people evacuating from Tokmak. There were vehicles over the last few days driving around announcing, I'm not sure whether it's actually Russians or Ukrainians doing a bit of psyops behind the lines, partisan activity, announcing for people to evacuate in certain areas. Well, it seems like there is footage now of people evacuating from Tokmak. Again, unsurprising. There's probably going to be a counteroffensive around there. They've been softening up the area, the Ukrainians, in Melitopol, in Tokmak, in Polihi, like lots of these areas where they've been continually hitting targets. And I would think that if I was living in Tokmak, I'd be thinking, yeah, time to visit Aunt Doris. But yeah, I don't know. So there could well be activities that are indicating that it is heating up in the area. Right, let's go to the northeast sector, which is your Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front line down there. And as I've already indicated, there are some mapping changes up near the Kupiansk direction, but I don't know that reflects any activity. My map looks like this: Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. ISW says of the area, usual kind of repelled attacks. Kreminna, Dubrova, so that's down south. Sinkivka, that's up north near Kupiansk, and the Russians claim that they repelled Ukrainian forces near Kreminna. That's a Russian mill blogger claim. So going both ways, I guess. Sinkivka, just to let you know, is just around here, just south of Liman Pershi. I've looked at the mapping changes that Deep State have, and actually Deep State's map is behind mine anyway, as far as where the Russian line of control is. Mine is more in line with the Russian mapper, Suryat maps in this area. And I would say, so I haven't moved my maps in line with Deep State's. And what else do they say? They say that Russian Southern Group of Forces spokesperson claimed that Spetsnaz units, so again, special operations units, are operating with the LNR Army Corps and have disrupted 2 Ukrainian troop rotations near Bilohorivka and Spirna. There's been quite a bit of mention of Spirna, so let's come down to those 2 places. So we come down to Kreminna here. We've got Dubrova in this area, so claims of repelled attacks there. Then Bilohorivka, the Russians are claiming that they have disrupted troop rotations there. And in Spirna, some claims that the Ukrainians have pulled out of Spirna, some Russian claims, but that doesn't seem to be true. In fact, does it say that here? Some mill bloggers amplified claims that Ukrainian forces withdrew from Spirna, while others claimed that Ukrainian forces control Spirna and battles continue east of the settlement. Contradictory claims from either side there. Now, Suryat Maps is confirming something ISW claimed some days ago with regard to some Ukrainian gains in the Chervonopepivka area. So Svatova, Kreminna, we'll look just here at the Chervonopepivka region. So if you remember, that's near the P66 or R66 highway going from between Kreminna and Svatova, and that was under control, or tentative control, I guess, of the Ukrainians early in the just post counter-offensive, where the Ukrainians took back their Kharkiv and parts of Luhansk and Donetsk in that lightning counter-offensive, and they got as far as Chervonopepivka and just past there, and then they lost ground to the Russians as the Russians re-exerted themselves. Well, Suryat Maps has said the situation at Luhansk front, recent video footage confirms a Ukrainian army recaptured some positions in the front of Chervonopepivka, and geolocations confirm that. So that isn't necessarily something that's happened over the last 24 hours. I would suggest this happened over the last week, and that I moved my maps to reflect that, and now I've actually just more firmly move the Russian lines in line with the Suryat maps there to say that, yes, that counteroffensive, I forget when it was, maybe 5 days ago, was indeed successful, and the Ukrainians did capture some territory back just northwest of Kreminna. Anyway, other than that, it's a case of getting down to Bakhmut. We will just look at Poulet-Volon's map before we get there, which doesn't show any movement from Kupiansk down south. So they say no indication of activity there. And as we get to Lysychansk-Kreminna area, the forest. There is indication from Vuhledar that the Ukrainians have, although they've gained some ground there, the Russians have also gained ground, so maybe closing in on that grey zone. But it appears that the Russians are putting pressure on the Ukrainians in the forest area and also in the Bilohorivka area just to the south. So that is, in fact, Deep State map shows some mapping gains for the Russians in this area here as well. So it looks like there's an intensification of the fighting inside the Serebryanska forest, but I haven't changed my maps. I'm just waiting to see what happens after the dust settles, and we'll move on to Bakhmut and north of Bakhmut. Now, the first thing to say, Vuhledar's map of Bakhmut shows that the Russians have made gains just to the northwest of Bakhmut. So we go back to my map, that's going to be in this kind of area here, just around Kromove. Perhaps here you've got the reservoir, the large pond here. If we go back to Vuhledar's map, just to see that as that large pond, and you can see that they've made these gains towards that highway that's coming in towards Kromove, just to the northwest of Kromove. So that is around this area. And in fact, Deep State map, the pro-Ukrainian map, which is indicated with the yellow line here, has shown that there is an advance of the Russians there as well, and taking this kind of tree line coming down there and a few areas of field in that region. So there is definitely pressure from the Russians in that area. As you can see, there's still a massive difference between the Deep State map in the north and the Syriac pro-Russian map, the Russian lines in the north as well. Although you can explain some of the mapping differences in just, grey zone, couple of 100 meters, this is certainly quite a significant difference and still remains a difference between the two mappers. Now, as you can see, I've left my blue lines to the east just to indicate what area it is that has been lost, as according to both mappers. So the Russians are now controlling all territory to the east of the railway line that comes down here. There was this pocket that was holding on that apparently, according to most people or everyone, is now lost to the Russians, and they control that area there. In fact, let's go to Syriac maps and see what they say about Bakhmut. So this is going back earlier claims of Bakhmut here. Ukrainian, no, that's actually Marinka. I'll talk about that later. Here we have Bakhmut. So in addition, with the advance west of the train station, the Russian army advanced from the old hospital and Kreminna Street's current front line, where they are trying to enter the garage area strongly defended by the Ukrainian army. So this was their advances in the north, which is reflected on my map, not reflected on Deep State at the moment. And then goes on to say the Russian army took control over the remaining area east of the railway and reached the high buildings from this axis. In addition, so there's that eastern pocket I was talking about. In addition, troops made new advances in the northwestern outskirts and are close to cutting the Kromova road. So that is that kind of area that Vuhledar was talking about in their map. So you can see all the mappers are seeming to come together to indicate the similar things, apart from, as I say again, apart from Deep State map in this whole northern area. I'm not quite sure why that is. And they also have this grain elevator still under control of the Ukrainians, or at least in the grey zone, whereas Syriac map, the pro-Russian mapper, has that under control of the Russians. Anyway, let's go to the ISW to see if they say anything in particular. The usual kind of claims about repelled attacks in various places. Ukrainian forces repelled Russian ground attacks near Stopochki. So that is just to the southwest here, or not just, it's quite a way out. Stopochki's here. This is where the Ukrainians did take back some land to the west of the canal. So the canal comes down here, and there is generally, it's been quite stable for some time along here, as the Russians have concentrated far more on the Bakhmut urban area But over the last couple of days, the Ukrainians did take this territory back, as according to most mappers. So, yeah, some continued repelled attacks for them there. The Russians and Ukrainian forces engaged in 34 combat clashes in Bakhmut over the past day. So there is an uptick of in intensity in fighting in Bakhmut. Interestingly, though, the commander of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Brigade said that the Russian forces in Bakhmut are attacking in squad-sized assault groups of 5 to 6 people. So this has gone back to the Wagner-style approach that we saw previously. We started to hear that they had moved up to units of 20 to 40 troops, as opposed to 5 to 10. And that could have been a reflection of the conventional Russian forces coming in to help Wagner, but possibly in Bakhmut itself, Wagner have a greater density of their own troops as they pulled out of the north and south, as I discussed yesterday. So as Wagner have pulled out of the north area here, northern area here, and southern area here to let the conventional Russian forces, MOD, the VDV, indeed possibly Spetsnaz, DNR as well, operate in these areas, the Wagner have increased their force density in Bakhmut itself, and that could be why you're seeing more attacks in 5 to 6 people, which is kind of sensible because you start accumulating too many troops, and then you're a lovely plump target for artillery. Anyway, as the ISW continues, Jan Gagin, who's claiming on behalf of the DNR, the Russian forces control about 90% of Bakhmut. Indeed, the ISW estimates around 87.9% themselves. So it seems like the Ukrainians are holding on to a very small portion of Bakhmut, and that is indisputable, especially if you see the wider region as Bakhmut as well. So if you're including Yahidne, Pidorodne, all these places around, or Pitnye, then yes, the Ukrainians control a very small amount. There was talk from reporting in Ukraine of Ukrainian counterattacks in the north. I haven't really seen evidence of that. Sometimes, I'm a little bit skeptical of overtly pro-Ukrainian as well as overtly pro-Russian sources, what their agenda might be. Just often it's sensible to be a little bit cautious, I guess. But that might happen. I'm just really interested to see what Ukraine do with Bakhmut. So when you look at the whole front line and you're thinking, well, they're going to do this counteroffensive, particularly in Zaporizhia. Do they do something up in the Svatova area or maybe Kreminna? Or do they even attempt to try and cross the Dnipro River? All this kind of stuff. But what are they going to do with Bakhmut? Bakhmut, the Russians have culminated there. They're potentially vulnerable to a counterattack themselves. It's not as defensively set up as other places in terms of fortifications and whatnot. And so this could be a good time for the Ukrainians to adapt their plans to hit back in Bakhmut. But I don't know. And you're waiting to see whether we think we know that the Ukrainians do have quite a number of troops in the area. They just don't want to get the force density too high in Bakhmut, because otherwise, as I say, there'll be good targets for artillery and you can take out many troops. So you might think, pile your troops into there in a counterattack, but that can actually be really dangerous and you might stand to lose too many troops in doing so. So they've got the capability perhaps, or the capacity perhaps, for a counterattack in this area. I'm just interested to see whether they will in fact do that. We go to some of the other sources. So War Mapper here says that the Russian forces have advanced westward across the railway line from the city centre, pushing further into the western districts of the city. So again, they still have this pocket, though. They're saying that the Ukrainians are ceding territory, or the Russians are pushing on near the train station across by this main road there. But this pocket still remains, whereas most other mappers, or all other mappers pretty much, have that final pocket west of the railway line taken by the Russians. If we go on to Null Reports, says pro-Ukrainian mapper says, in Bakhmut, I slightly modified the map. Russian troops control all areas east of the train track. In addition, I slightly expanded the area south around Kogo Street, which is, I'll show you on my map. but it's this area to the southwest here, very close to the T0504 highway that comes in. Fighting is in favor of Russian troops. Fighting is now taking place on the west side of Bakhmut train station. So this then goes back to what Warmap is saying, that around here that there's fighting. So it seems that the Russians are still continuing to gain ground in Bakhmut, and people are saying the writing's on the wall. It's the last battle, decisive battles, and all this stuff, but it keeps going on, and it looks like a sort of controlled withdrawal to me, where the Ukrainians are happy enough, I say that inverted commas, happy enough to cede territory, to withdraw, to bleed the Russians as much as possible. And there's still, there's an awful lot of footage coming out of obviously Russian losses, but one would assume there'll be footage from the Russians of Ukrainian losses as well. But you would assume that it still is in the favor of the Ukrainians, and that is why they are continuing to defend. In fact, I saw some footage. Let's dig that out. Here it is on Defmon, but you can see this variously on socials, often cut up because it's a long video. This is 11.5 minutes. It's been cut up into different sections. This is some of the most incredible footage, fighting footage I've seen. Particularly there's one guy, the guy with the GoPro on his helmet. He seems to be somewhat of a leader, and balls of steel. This is just insane, says Defmon. Guy filming got some balls, starts off slow, close call at 1 minute, and after 150, it just escalates. It is incredible footage of what war is like. Also, the importance of people doing their bit, like people in a bunker loading up magazines, because they are absolutely hammering through their magazines of ammunition. And it goes to show how important, when you see something like the US providing 9 million rounds of ammunition, I think something like that in the latest military aid haul, and you're thinking, wow, that's a lot. And then you think, yeah, these guys, that's just him and his mates using that many rounds in 11 minutes, and you can imagine how many rounds get fired off from both sides over every single day of this war, and you need millions. Anyway, that just go and watch that if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Also, what I think this footage shows, it shows the importance of drones. Now, you don't see any drone footage, but he's constantly talking to someone else who is telling it on the radio, saying, trenches at 12 o'clock, there's still 2 people alive. Trenches at 1 o'clock, you need to sort that out. Trenches at, someone obviously has a view of what's going on and is telling him what he needs to do. And actually, God, that must be so comforting to know that someone's watching your back, because there's someone still alive over there, watch out, and all this kind of stuff. So the communication between the drone and these guys on the battlefield in real time is immensely important. In fact, arguably life-saving. Anyway, that's probably enough for Bakhmut. You get the picture. It's still exactly what's been happening over the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 months, 9 months, which is a slow constriction of the Ukrainian forces, but the Ukrainians are still defending, and obviously because one would assume it's in their best interest to do so. Right, let's move further down south towards Avdivka. So as we zoom in, let's see what the ISW has to say. And as you can imagine, usual kind of claims about repelled attacks. So Ukrainian general staff claim there are unsuccessful attacks in Avdivka or towards Avdivka itself. Stepova, Berdichi, and Siverny, and Vodyany, Pervomaysky, and Nevelsky. Okay, that's pretty much everywhere. So that is basically Berdichi, Stepova, which is there. And then we have Vodyany, Pervomaysky, Nevelsky. So basically your usual contenders there. The Russians say, and of course, Marinka and Pobeda. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces advanced west of Novobakhmutivka and near Kherson and made gains near Pervomaysky and Nevelsky. So that is to say that they are making gains towards Novokalinove here, west of Novobakhmutivka. And then Pervomaysky as well, Siverny, which is there. So, Kherson is, where is Kherson? That is up here towards Novokalinove as well. So anyway, I'm not. There's no mapping changes from anyone. It just appears it's the usual kind of claims of gains or repelled attacks, and we end up pretty much where we started. If we come down to Marinka, there's been quite a lot of intense fighting, I believe, there over the past few days. Poulet Volant indicates that there is fighting there as well as down in Vuhledar and indeed to the west of Vuhledar. Um, the ISW says of Marinka that Russian sources also claim that Russian forces are conducting positional battles and advancing along Druzhba Avenue in Marinka. Russian sources continue to discuss operations of various DNR elements along that front. Just to remind you, I guess, where Druzhba Avenue is, or Druzhba, it is this road that goes from the southwest to the northeast, and the Russians have gained to the south in this industrial area, and to the north, and indeed further north of Marinka in the agricultural area and settlements just to the north of this kind of water feature. But Druzhba Avenue seems to be holding on in the center. This is all entirely rubble, and there aren't particularly high-rise buildings left in Marinka. It is an apocalyptic hellscape, but that is what's going on in Marinka. And then we come down to Vuhledar, and apparently there is activity there as well. If we look, this was mentioned in reporting from Ukraine as well in their video. If we go to the ISW, Russian forces conducted ground attacks in western Donetsk Oblast. Yesterday, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensive actions near Pristivka and Vuhledar. Russian mill bloggers posted footage reportedly of 155th Naval Infantry Brigade elements shooting down a Ukrainian Su-25 aircraft near Vuhledar. I showed you that yesterday I believe, no, it was in the map update, because I just saw the footage. It just came in as I was doing it. Russian sources also claim that Ukrainian forces are conducting unsuccessful reconnaissance in force operations in the Vuhledar area, and reporting from Ukraine is kind of indicating this is perhaps ahead of the counteroffensive. This could be, some people are saying that Vuhledar is a potential for part of the counteroffensive, one of the areas to attack in order to get down and surround Mariupol or cut off this. I mean, there are so many different theories, right? And I've talked you through them on multiple occasions, but it could be something like coming down there, or indeed there, whichever way. So you're cutting off these. Vuhledar is quite a sensible area, so that would be more like that, because you've got the railway that comes through Volnovakha to the south and then splits. So if you cut that line, then Mariupol can't be supplied from the east. And then if you cut down, I don't know, something like that, or I don't know, something like that, then you're really playing merry havoc with the Russian logistics. And then the idea would be that you eventually do something like this and take this whole area from the Russians. I mean, that something like that. You get the point, but it's going to be considering the impact of cutting logistics lines. These ground lines of communication are so super important, and the Russians use their railways so much that that taking them out will be super important for isolating Crimea as much as anything. But yeah. That is what the ISW says about the area. There was a little bit of footage of, and this came from Tim White. He's not 100% sure about the provenance of this, but this is supposedly a building in Vuhledar. Now, why this is important is because these buildings have really stood an absolute hammering from the Russians. If we go back to my map and just zoom in to Vuhledar, as you should know by now, it's on high ground north of Pavlivka and Mikilska, and these buildings are, I think it's kind of purpose built for the mining in the area. That's how I understand that. You've got these random high-rise buildings just built in the middle of nowhere. So these are a really useful place for the Ukrainians to spot for artillery, and shoot their ATGMs, their anti-tank guided missiles, and take out any Russian advances and mechanized equipment in the area. Now, if this I mean, that those buildings have been absolutely hammered by artillery and thermobaric munitions. But if you're suddenly getting damage like that, then that suggests these larger aerial bombardments from aviation. So these GPS guided FOB 500 or bigger bombs doing like huge damage like that, and that is significant. So really, if that's something that they can do more and more, then the Ukrainians are going to be wanting to do something about that, and perhaps offense is a best form of defense in that area. So anyway, that was worth noting. As we come out of Vuhledar, we'll look to see what the ISW says about the rest of Zaporizhia and Donetsk. So although reporting from Ukraine made some pretty big claims about activity yesterday, ISW doesn't really amplify that much, or at least I don't know. The ISW is sometimes behind because of when it gets put together. So it's often sort of considering what happens 24 hours before. And this ISW report comes out the night before. I do my reports in the morning, and I will lift a lot of information from the ISW daily report, but in the knowledge that actually there's been a good 12 hours plus since that report came out from when I'm doing these kind of reports. In fact, even longer now because I'm a bit further behind today. But it says Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces conducted limited ground attacks in Zaporizhia Oblast on April 19th. Russian mill bloggers claim that elements of the 291st Motorized Rifle Regiment and repelled Ukrainian probing actions in the Zaporizhia direction. Russian mill bloggers claim that on April the 18th, Ukrainian forces attacked near Orikhiv and towards Robotyne, but did not specify the outcome of these attacks. And again, reporting from Ukraine talks about this. So as we come to the west and into Zaporizhia Oblast, past Neshkuchne and Velika Novosilka, we come towards Hyliopole and Orikhiv here, Hyliopole, and attacks to the south of there towards Robotyne, where we have seen reconnaissance and force activities from the Ukrainians be repelled before, but they appear to be doing similar sort of activities again. There were talks about nocturnal attacks as well, coming from some of the pro-Russian sources over the last sort of 48 hours or so. So yeah, definitely looks like things could be heating up along this line, but not 100% sure what has happened over the last 24 hours. Just going to wait to see whether the claims I've reported from Ukraine are confirmed in other sources. Just before I leave you, let's just pop in to see what Rebar says, pro-Russian source. I forgot to access their claims earlier. Starobilsk area, so Kreminna area, Ukrainians making unsuccessful attempts at offensives in a wooded area and a push back to their initial positions. They talk about, all the stuff that I said in Bakhmut. And despite high losses from Russian artillery fire, of course, the Ukrainians gained a foothold in Stepochki. Remember, that's the area to the southwest of Bakhmut, just west of Ivanivska, which had previously been in a grey zone, they claim. Actually, Stepochki is not in a grey zone, I don't think. It depends whether you mean the area to the east of that or the town itself. So just to remind you, they're talking about the gains of the Ukrainians in this area. Whoop, as we come down here, Stepochki. It's likely to be this area around the canal, the mining, I think, the aggregates area there. I think that's what it is, taken back by the Ukrainians. I've left my Ukrainian line there. This is probably, it's safe to say that's probably a grey zone. Anyway, that's all for the Frontline update for today. Please like, subscribe and share. Really do appreciate all of your support. It's going to be, I think, an interesting next couple of weeks as we are wondering when the counteroffensive will start. We're wondering whether any Ukrainian activity is part of that larger counteroffensive movement. And are we jumping the gun? Are pro-Ukrainians getting excited, or are these indeed preemptive strikes or reconnaissance and force or gathering information or probing in advance of that larger counteroffensive movement? Anyway, take care, and I'll speak to you later.